Breaking Through by Brenda Smith. Chapter 10, Inference. Chapter Review. What will you learn in this chapter? What is an inference? Why are jokes funny? What is the effect of slanted language? And what are conclusions? Inference. What is an inference? That's the first thing we need to talk about because that is what this chapter is about. Understanding inference is so important because what it really means is a meaning that is suggested rather than directly stated, but can be deducted from clues. So, clearly stated, we are reading between the lines. We are making an educated guess based on the clues and facts and information given to us. Now, we don't know if we're 100% right, but we know that we're making an educated guess from the information, so we are right enough, and that is enough for us to make an inference and move on. So, in order to make proper inferences, we really need to pay attention to the facts and the clues. It can't be some random crazy guess. It must be based on the material that is given to us. So when we analyze that, we're reading between the lines and making a proper inference. Inference from cartoons and jokes. Often we need to use our inferencing skills, our reading between the lines skills, to really understand cartoons and jokes because they're not directly stating what they mean, but you can pick up how they feel based on the information given to us. Let's look at this example. Now, Sam says, "Do you know how to save a politician from drowning?" And Joe says, "No." And then Sam says, "Good." We can infer from this cartoon joke that Sam likes the idea that Joe cannot save a politician from drowning. Therefore, politicians will drown. I don't like politicians. That's what Sam is saying. So if we read between the lines, we can figure out through an educated guess or an inference that Sam really doesn't like politicians and wouldn't mind if they happen to drown. Recognizing suggested meaning. Now, remember before we said that in order to understand inference or to make an inference is a suggested meaning. It's not blunt, in your face, objective, obvious. We have to read between the lines. So for an example, the welcome of the land to the men from the sea was warm and generous, but a still and dripping shape was carried slowly up the beach, and the land's welcome for it could only be the different and sinister hospitality of the grave. This is from The Open Boat by Stephen Crane. Now, what is the assumption or what is the suggested meaning? If we look at that passage again and we dissect it, it's not telling us straightforward, but we can suggest or make an inference that someone has drowned. Now, inference is not easy. We have to practice it. We have to really think. We have to dissect. We may have to reread a couple times, but it is so important to understand inference with poetry, short stories, and novels. Also when we're watching a movie, because we're making educated guesses all the time when we're watching a movie and we are inferencing. So we may have to read it a couple times, but what this suggests is that someone has drowned, and that's the proper inference. Connecting with prior knowledge. Now, another great part of trying to figure out inference is knowing that you all have a prior knowledge. Everybody has prior knowledge, and we all have different prior knowledge. This prior knowledge can help us read between the lines and figure out what the author is saying, especially if we already have an idea of what that subject matter is about. So inference requires linking old knowledge to new knowledge, prior knowledge to new knowledge. Clues may draw on assumed knowledge of history, current issues, and social concerns. So if you are reading about slavery, for example, and you had grandparents or great-grandparents that lived through slavery, you're going to have a better time understanding the material and also drawing inferences from that material because you know something about the subject matter at hand. So the more you read and the more you know, the easier inference will be because it's easier to pick up on those suggested meanings and reading between the lines because you already have a taste of the material and the ideas behind the words. Recognizing slanted language. Another part of understanding inference is to understand language and how people use language to suggest a meaning without saying it in an obvious and direct, blunt way. So there are two different types of meanings to word. There is one, denotation. The denotation of a word is the exact meaning of the word from a dictionary. It is what it is. It's black and white. There's no discussing or arguing it about it. However, typically, people use connotations of words, and that means that it is the meaning or the emotion or feeling behind the word. And that's when words can be slanted, misinterpreted, and suggest a meaning that's different from what the person actually means. So we have to be careful. For example, look at this house in the picture. You could say run down, you could say deteriorated, or you could say neglected. Now, what do you think has the nicest meaning? What do you think has the most pleasant meaning behind it? So you probably want to use a word like neglected. That just means that it needs some love and attention. The other first two, run down and deteriorated, means that it's in ruins. It's a wreck. It's a mess. Now, all of them typically mean the same, but based on what word you use, that's the connotation you're pushing. And that is the suggested meaning. So although they all sound similar, one has a different feeling from the others. So connotation helps in understanding inference because you are drawing a picture in your mind based on that word and therefore drawing an inference. Drawing conclusions. Now, drawing conclusions is a similar meaning to drawing an inference or making an inference. What you're doing is you're using facts, hints, clues, and your prior knowledge to make an assumption and then draw a conclusion and say, I got it. The author means X, Y, and Z based on the information provided to me. I am reading between the lines, I'm using all of this information, and I am drawing a conclusion and making an inference. So often, drawing conclusions and inferences are synonyms. They mean the same, but they're used differently sometimes when you are reading. So note both of those terms because they mean the same thing. Interpreting literary devices or figurative language. Remember I mentioned before that understanding language is so important in understanding how to inference because different words will be used to sway you so you come up with a suggested meaning, which is an inference. So the first figurative language is a simile. A simile is when you compare two objects together, but they're not the same. For example, Spot ran like the wind. Spot is a dog and Spot is not the wind, but he ran like the wind. So that is inferring that he is super, super fast. Now, in a simile, we use the word like or as because it is a soft comparison, not a direct comparison, a soft, indirect comparison. So Spot is not the wind, Spot just ran like the wind. And from that, we can infer that Spot ran very fast.